Okay, well, I'll open it up then. So we have the MVSD input presentation. Our finance chair, Devin, is going to open up with some slides and some community input forum that we have here today. Take it away.
All right, thanks to everyone who joined us online and in person. This is our community input forum, so a chance to see where the budget is at this point in time, and provide any input you may have to the board ahead of our vote, which is scheduled for next Tuesday, January 23rd. We'll go through the slide presentation. It's a little longer than these have been in the past, particularly because we're going to talk a little bit about Act 127, new law that's affecting education finance in Vermont. There's also some slides in here that are really prepared for the informational session later on in the year. So we won't dwell on some of those. We'll move through them fairly quickly, but we'll hit a couple of highlights. So, all right, we'll begin. The way the budget starts every year is with our community budget survey, which went out back in the fall. We received a very good response rate this year. We had a few hundred folks return that survey and provide their input. A good portion of those folks are people who are in the district and do not have children in the school system. And that for us is sometimes a difficult group of people to access. So it was good to get a sizable response from that group of individuals. We'll look here at some of our key results. There were really four themes, four questions, topics that jumped out as being identified as the top priorities for the respondents of that survey. Blue and red on here are the highest level of importance. So what we typically look for is high blue rate is essential, red is important. So essential or important to fund in our budget. So these are the four that jumped out as having the highest percentage of those two slices. They would break down into number one being instructional programs for the academic success of the students. Number two was looking for success for our students after they graduate. Number three there is our teacher retention and recruitment, which we know ties heavily into numbers 1 and 2. And then finally, investments in our school facilities, which is always important. We have a lot of old buildings in our district. And the nice thing here, this is kind of a check on the board as well. At the beginning of each year, we go through a process where we discuss and develop board goals and district goals. The four highest scoring items on that community input survey align with our district goals that we selected at the beginning of the year. So this lets the board know that we are still moving down the path that the community wants us to be moving down. So we also have student success, post-secondary outcomes, and retention. We have attendance down there as number 4, which really is meant to tie into student success. So how are those things incorporated into the budget? I'm going to turn it over here for a few slides to Joanne, who's the chair of our Student Success Committee.
So we have the instructional programs for student success. So in progress, things that have been implemented in the past and are continuing to move forward. So added the intervention services in reading and math at elementary schools in MVU. Purchased and implemented the new math program to align all of our grades, kindergarten through 12. Professional learning for teachers to support instruction. Increased tutoring for students who are struggling, and improve math results, particularly in middle school and high school. So, and then, so in the proposed budget, we want to be able to keep intervention positions and supports to address gaps resulting from COVID. We would like to add new class offerings and reduce study halls at MVU. adding the social studies, so one full employee at MVU, adding teachers for alternative classrooms in Swanton Elementary and MVU Middle School, purchase an evidence-based reading program and professional development for teachers. So our next one is the strategies for student success after high school, which also important to everyone. So what has happened and is happening is added ag teaching staff and professional learning. We added hours to the ag classes to meet the CTE requirements, increased work-based learning experiences, increasing access to NCTC for grade 10 students, PLP teacher focused on flexibility pathways, aspirations work with the VSAC, software to facilitate work-based learning pathways, and after-school experiences for career exploration. So proposed to moving forward in the years, added a half of a business teacher, continued and expand partnership with community partners for internships, job shadows, work and career explorations, and development for programs to train youth in leadership and employ them in after-school program with younger students. And then also for our professional staff recruitment and retention. So we've done our contract. So the current contract with teachers have meaningful pay increases, and contract with support staff also has a meaningful pay increase and allow for flexible assignments of staff. We've added benefits such as life insurance and dental to all classes of employees. And we've increased professional development for teachers and staff support. So we have seen a slight increase in teacher retention and continue to monitor and address retention through multiple avenues. We have significantly increased in our retention in the support staff and increased tax capacity. So the Act 127 hopefully could allow us for further investments in retention in the future years.
And then we'll turn it over to Peter to talk about some of the facility projects that are proposed.
School facility project. So Devin asked me, I figured he must have put this together because he asked me to do slide 17. I didn't think that was a coincidence. That's Josh Allen's number. So let's look at the projects for school facilities. So things that we have worked on and that we're in the progress of working on, MVU roof project. So last year we finished the second pod. The year before we did the first one. So we've got two of those completed, and then you'll see on the proposed on the next slide that we have another one scheduled for this year or this coming year. LED lighting in all our schools. That was a huge project. We had help with Efficiency Vermont, putting in all LED lighting. We're looking at a proposed or estimated, I should say, savings once we get them all in place of about $23,000 a year. So that is a big plus, and that's an improvement not only in cost, but lighting itself is better. And as you can see, the people here, the lights just went off in the other section. So if there's no movement or anything, the lights go out. So we're saving energy there as well. So good project there. A lot of work's been done in Highgate with the HVAC system. That's been a real plus, and it's helped with the heating and cooling as the building is cooler in the summertime. And it helped in the in-between days when you don't really need the heat, but it's a little cooler. It keeps the building warmer as well. So that's been a really nice project. Everyone's seen the new sign out front of MVU. The new digital sign looks awesome. The stonework, very impressive coming into MVU. We've done air purification in all our buildings, and we continue to do that. Of course, the big project in Franklin with the expansion to the school. That is coming along great. The new kitchen hood and fire suppression system in Highgate, I got to see that this summer when they were putting it in. Fire warden inspected that. They had not recommended, said that we needed a new system there. So that's been put in. We're beginning the process over several years now for the conditioning of the air in the Swan Elementary schools. Security cameras have been a big focus in all our buildings and getting programs that are symmetrical in all of it. So the same systems in all the schools so that they're easily run and easily worked on as they're all the same systems. And this summer, we're going to be putting new windows in the Babcock building. So that will be on this year's budget. Proposed in Highgate, the brick building has some, it's been failing. The roof's been failing for a few years now, and we're going to look at replacing that roof. Fire alarm replacement system and new basketball hoops in the gym. So that's a nice upgrade for Highgate. Swanton, we're looking at replacing the Babcock roof. Central roof repair as well. Stormwater work and a new PA system that's badly needed there. And then at MVU, we've got the phase 1 parking lot resurfacing. Anyone that's been driven in the driveway or the parking lot knows the need there. And another big need for the MVU parking lot is lighting. Need more lighting, better lighting out there. So that's another project we're looking for. I talked about the next phase of the roof. The next pod's going to be done. And we'd like to support the girls field hockey team with a new scoreboard. They don't have one. So that would be a nice benefit for them. So we have that in Franklin. We have talked about the addition going on there, but we're also looking at the security cameras for that school. And there's more priorities to share later. So,
all right, thanks, Peter. Okay, so with all those things, Laura and her team have crunched all the numbers and put them into a draft budget. And this is the where things stand at the moment that the board is considering. Glossary of terms, I'm going to leave that up on the screen just for a second, but certainly not going to read through all of that. If you are so inclined, pause the video and read through. Okay, so here we get into the numbers and what everyone's curious about. What is the budget and what are the taxes? So what we have here is FY24 against FY25. And we have to call out the substantial increase in that expenditure budget of $8.2 million. Net education spending up by $8.3 million. So I guess I'll preface all this by saying that as we move into the final portion of the presentation on Act 127, we'll start talking about the reasons for all of these, for these larger increases. And it's going to be mostly in the capital section. As we just go to the next slide, you will see how those increases break down. So salaries and benefits, purchase services, these are kind of the routine increases you saw or that we typically see. It's our annual inflation negotiated raises for professional staff, pretty significant benefits increases, 16.4%. And this incorporates all those items that Joanne had talked about in those earlier slides. So those fall into those smaller blocks of the pie chart. Peter talked about that large green one, that $4.6 million increase in capital projects. This is a direct result of the strategy we're using to react to Act 127, both the incentives and the risks that it has created for us as a district. So we'll go through this. This is a quick just note on a few of those things, but I think probably most of the discussion of what we've put in there and we'll feedback on from those initial slides from Joanne and Peter. So that increase in expenditures, what does that look like for taxes? And here we get into probably the bottom line that everyone's waiting for. Here's our tax calculation that is put together every year. It starts with that higher expenditure budget, the 53 million, goes through the steps that the state uses to calculate our estimated equalized homestead tax rate. And that comes up to a calculated rate of $1.422 per hundred. However, that is not what we would be paying with this budget as proposed. And this is the first part where we see the results of Act 127. So there is a 5% cap on the tax rate increase, regardless of the spending up to a point. This is below that point where further review happens, but this does kick in the 5% cap. So if this budget is passed like this, it is a 5% increase in our equalized homestead tax rate. So that's what we'll see as we go through the rest of the slides. There's a lot of math here. I'm not going to dive into this one at all tonight, except for a couple points on here. This one we'll dig into the math during the informational session. But what I want to point out here is that there are two components to our tax changes every year. They can go either direction. One is the impacts of the school budget. That's the equalized homestead tax rate. The second piece is the common level of appraisal, the change in the common level of appraisal. And you can think of that as property value inflation. So the state does their math. They say the value of your home has gone up 5%, so we're going to tax you 5% more. Well, this year, they said they do that by town. So every town has their own change in the common level appraisal, their own property value inflation. And so this is the biggest piece of the budget change this year. The 5% is smaller than the effect of the CLA. And so in Franklin, the overall result of this budget is a 20.7% increase in our taxes. In Highgate, 13.46% increase, and in Swanton, 19.04%. And 5% of that, in each case, is coming from the school budget. The other component, Franklin 15.7, Highgate 18.5, and Swanton 14, coming from property value inflation. And so this is what's causing some heartburn on the board, knowing that we have chosen a strategy to utilize some of what's going on in Act 127. But that's happening at the same time as this significant increase in property values, which is impacting our taxes in the same way. So this is a piece, I would say that this strategy we're using is something we want feedback from the community on, because changing the strategy would be a dramatic change to this budget. And so that's something we'd like to know. So we're going to look at quick history of our equalized tax rates. Just a couple slides. Again, to tease out the difference between the school budget piece and the property value inflation. These are equalized tax rates since 2020, which is the first year we were merged district. They're lower, right? So our taxes should be lower. That'd be nice, but that's not the case. And so as we go to the next slide, I know this is a comment I've seen or heard is, well, we're a merged district. They told us our taxes would go down. Our taxes have only ever gone up. Why? And it's because that second piece, the property value inflation, has far outpaced the school budget changes. So we saw the equalized tax rates come down since 2020. It's actually resulted in a roughly 9% decrease in our Franklin, Highgate, Swanton, all of us, 9% decrease in our property taxes. That has been overshadowed in each of the three towns by substantial increases in our property values. So 35% Franklin, 31 Highgate and 27 in Swanton in that time since 2020. So again, we'll talk about that in the informational meeting. That's a point I want to make. But now we're going to look at Act 127 and start talking about why we're proposing a budget that looks like this, talk about that strategy and ask for the feedback on it. So Act 127 was designed to enhance equity across the state of Vermont, statewide funding system. What came to be seen was that schools in wealthier, more populated areas, schools that had fewer kids of high need, those schools were funded at rates that were higher than, maybe necessary, higher than the resources needed to educate those students when you then compare to the schools that have a lot of those higher needs. So we had disproportionate allocation of our state tax dollars. This was meant to address that. MVSD is one of those schools that's historically underfunded. So the result of this law was that we should have, for the same tax rate, we would have more funding coming to MVSD. So we could increase our spending, increase our expenditure budget, really keep our ESSER program that we put in over the last few years, the supports for those kids who needed it most. And we could do that without an increase or with a minimal increase to our education tax rates. We'll go to the next slide. This is some of the details of that. I guess we won't dive into that right now. It essentially counts students of higher needs as more students than they are, which then gives us a higher proportion of those pooled funds in the education fund. That's kind of what that's saying. Okay, let's skip this one, I think. Okay, that's small, but we'll talk about the colors. All right. So the intention of the law, like I said, was to increase funding to the schools who needed it the most. But it comes with some extra caveats. And so the first is that for the schools like us who were advantaged and could draw more funds for our tax dollars, there are those other schools on the other side who are going to get fewer tax dollars back to their schools for what they had put in, or they'd have to cut their spending a lot. So their tax rates would have to go up significantly to keep the same spending. So the state said, okay, well, that's too much of a burden. Some of those tax rates will go up 20, 30%. So they put a 5% cap on the amount it could change. And so that's that one first piece of it. And then they put a third limit on us that it can only go up so far before a state reviews us and can say yes or no to it. So the 5% cap is really important for us here. And this is where our strategy comes in. If we do not hit the 5% cap, so if our spending, if we kept it the same, no extra investments, we kind of kept our spending down low, maybe we utilize the first piece, we bring in our extra tax capacity, keep our tax rates the same, that's the blue slice at the bottom. If we go that far, we could have tax rates about, it's the yellow slice actually, I should say. $1.24, is that what you said?
Well, a couple versions ago.
Yeah. I think the yellow one with all our routine stuff, which is that pie graph excluding the green chunk of capital, that comes out to like $1.26 tax rate. We're proposing $1.29 tax rate, $1.299, which gets us all the way to the 5% cap. The benefits of reaching the 5% cap is that in future years, we are also able to use a 5% cap. And this is where we're talking about the risk of a state reaction to this law. We're afraid that they're going to find the education fund does not have enough funds in it, and they will look to increase taxes for everyone across the board. Well, if you are one of those schools that hits the 5% cap this year, you get to also utilize a 5% cap the year after and the year after and the year after for 5 years. And so if the state comes back and says everybody's taxes are going up 8% this year, we would still, next year or the year after, ours would still be limited at 5%. This is a very real risk. We saw it last week. We're afraid they're going to change in that tax calculation, the yield, property dollar yield, which we won't talk about what it is, but the legislature sets it and adjusts everybody's taxes across the state. On Friday, I mean, we're this far into our budget preparation, so is every other school in Vermont. On Friday, they announced that that number was changed by 3%. Everybody's baseline went up 3%. So our gap to our 5% actually shrunk. Because they just raised everybody's taxes 3% anyway. And so we saw it now with a small reaction, and we're looking forward to the future years and trying to guard against some potentially significant increases that the state may give to us. So we decided as a board to get to the 5% cap. Now, when you get to the 5% cap, it comes with some benefits because you can increase your spending beyond that without the additional tax burden in the current year. And so that's where those capital projects come in. This is our chance. This is, again, a school that's historically underfunded according to the legislature. And if you look around, you can see that, right? We can look at some other schools around the state and see big fancy facilities. We can see programs that we don't offer. Those are kind of those Cadillac programs, and we don't have that. What we have is a long list of capital facilities projects that have been delayed. We have a 5-year plan that our facilities committee has been working on. And so this is really our 1-year chance to utilize the cap and catch ourselves up, which is really what this law had intended for schools like us to be able to do, maybe not in this manner, but to give us the funds to catch ourselves up, get our facilities in place, keep our educational supports that we had for ESSER, and really start pushing ourselves forward. And so that's what we're proposing is those additional capital funds. And now the reason it's in capital funds and not new programs and new staff and new teachers is that we need flexibility because we aren't 100% sure how the state's going to react to this in future years. So if all this goes away and changes, we're not locking ourselves in now to big expenditure budgets in the future. We're giving ourselves the flexibility to pull all this back if we need to, or over time shift as operational expenses grow, shift out of capital and back into the operational expenditures and try to smooth that tax rate over the long term. So this is a long-term strategy we're looking at right now. And it starts with hitting the 5% cap in year 1. Now, there's some notes there on the side. So really it's the extra value we're talking about once we get beyond the 5%. We can essentially get a 3.5 times return for our tax dollars. So that gap we need to get there is an extra $40 per $100,000 of value is what's funding all that capital we talked about. It's equivalent, if there were no cap, to $137 per $100,000 of taxable value. So we're really getting a 3.5 times multiplier on the investment now if we're willing to take that strategy and make that investment. So that is the recommendation of the board as the budget stands at the moment. Okay, I think that's enough on that. So we are here for input. So I wanted to explain that strategy because this budget is shaped around that strategy more than anything else. It's that beginning part where we talk about the investments in our programs, and then it's the Act 127 strategy. And so that's the feedback we're looking for tonight and for the rest of the week ahead of next week's board meeting. So the events to remember as we go, we are doing our final budget input meeting tonight. 1 week from today, January 23rd, is when we are scheduled to vote on a budget to be adopted by the board. Information will start to go out at that point, and then we'll do our annual report and budget informational meeting later in February ahead of town meeting day on March 5th. And that is the end of the slideshow. Turn it back over to Rack.
Turn it over now. If we have any questions from any community members or anybody online.
Siobhan Cooper has raised a hand.
Hello, go ahead, Siobhan.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm a little late in the game here, but I'm just trying to gather some information to kind of help spread, what's going on with the budget and how we could put that into layman's terms for the average Joe. First, let me just say that was a great presentation. I understood all but like 2%, or I only understood about 2% of it myself, not coming from a school, from the school board or accounting background, and if it's possible, I would love to meet with somebody at a later time to kind of talk about this a little bit more in layman's terms and break it down. The only question I have, because I don't have much knowledge on this, is the public asks, they're worried about that whole proposed 18% increase. That was a possibility. And I might be wrong when I ask this, but in comparison to the 18% increase that was proposed by the state, when you went through your slideshows, I wrote a few numbers down. So Franklin at 15.73%, is that the same number that we're talking, like the same category we're talking about?
I believe that letter was the all-in.
Ed spending.
What was the ed spending?
I think that's what she's talking about.
That was an overall education spending prediction
Okay.
for the whole state
Which doesn't necessarily one-to-one map to
to your tax.
tax changes.
That was a month and a half ago now.
Right. So I think,
So
Yeah,
when it
if you-
said Franklin 15.73%, Highgate 8.46%, Swanton 14.04%, that's what you're talking about, overall spending?
no, that's actually, those numbers you just read are the change in our property values. So the state looks at they try to essentially make an estimate on property value inflation year to year, and they do it by town. And so your listed value doesn't change, right? But they'll tax you more if they judge that your town has, the properties in your town have increased in value. So that's the piece we don't have any control over. The state tells us what it is, and it's kind of our starting point for our total tax rate change. So on top of those numbers for everything you just read is the change in the school budget, which is 5%. So the total tax change increase for Franklin is 20.7, Highgate 13.5, roughly 13.4, and Swanton 19.0.
Now, are these the same numbers that the state refers to when they said that possible 18% change?
That's an education, how much education
Yeah,
spending.
so no,
Not tax rate.
no,
Okay.
they weren't talking about tax rates. They were just looking at the budget expenditure growth.
So
Okay,
overall,
so do you guys have a number for that, or is it that 5% cap?
Would it be the 53 divided by the 44?
Oh, yes, the net ed spending increase.
Yeah.
Expenditures minus the revenues, yeah, it was 24. Okay.
Yeah.
24.56.
24.56 would be ours. Yeah, okay. That's the
Okay.
number. Did you hear that one?
24.5% is the increase that is equal to the basic information they gave the public about the possible increase.
Yes, because of course, 18.5% of district that spends more than we do is a lot more in terms of dollars. Our dollar, we have a percent increase because of the increase in our tax capacity that Devin explained. Hoping to put that in one-time capital projects. But when you're talking about percentages in South Burlington and a percentage in Essex and a percentage in Winooski or a percentage in Missisquoi, they're very different actual dollar.
Okay.
It's not taking into account the giant increase in our long-term weighted ADM, which is the big change.
Right, and that's
The way we divide up our education spending into a tax rate is based on pupils, and they've always been weighted, but the weights now are in our favor. We're actually calculating more accurately how many students are living in low-income, free and reduced lunch status, and that I think has been the largest change for us. That will not increase from year to year to year. This 1 year, we're getting a big jump. So our expenditure number is going up, but our tax rate is staying at a more stable level because that's the purpose of this change.
Okay, section E on, number 1 for Acts 127, that talks about pupil weights. Okay, I'm probably gonna have a bunch more questions. I won't take up more time here because it would go in one ear and out the other. I wouldn't understand it all. But if, I could send Julie, you have my email address. If you could, there's somebody willing to take a little bit of time, with me this, next week or so and help break this down into layman's terms for the average Joe, that would be wonderful.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Siobhan. Appreciate that. Also keep in mind, we have our budget informational meeting that will be coming up as well, and a lot of information. We're going to cover all of this again in more detail, and we explained this quite a few times. So feel free to share that, those dates, and if you're able to join for those meetings as well, we would encourage that, and anybody else that you know who has questions.
I'd also encourage you, anyone else online, to go back and look at our meetings online. We've been discussing the budget for a few months now. May not be the most exciting viewing, but we've been open and honest about what we're doing, asking a lot of questions like you've done. We've talked through it. So I think if you go and look at past meetings, you may get an idea of how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Northwest Access TV, just to shout it out. Thank you, guys.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Do we have any other questions online?
I haven't seen any hands up.
What's the biggest risk?
We've thought through this and tried to get rid of the big risks. So as we evaluated it, the biggest risk we felt was extending, using the extra funds for costs that we can't take out later, hiring people, building programs. And so the response was substitute the capital expenditures instead, work on that list of things. If the law changes drastically, those are things that don't repeat. So we can pull those out for future years. I think the biggest risk we have right now is that's still here, is that if this budget is voted down, we have to cut everything above the 5% cap plus more before we affect our tax rates. So cutting $1 million doesn't do anything to our tax rates. Cutting the chart here. It's $3.5 million. Is that almost $3.5 million would have to come out before we touched our tax rates. So operationally, and then we don't get this opportunity in the future. So we would lock in sort of our current 5-year long-term capital plan is still going to be a long-term capital plan versus taking our opportunity right now to bring ourselves back up to, a good starting point and working from there.
Yeah, the other big risk is that if we fall below 5%, next year, through forces outside of our control, we could start our budget next year with a 5% increase, and we're absorbing all of that, and that's our starting. As opposed to being able to start and know that past that 5%, we can absorb it because of Act 127 cap. That's really the biggest risk. So if some sort of a version of this is not passed above 5%, future years, MVSD will have to put the bill for all of that, and we're not going to gain it.
And the risk is that we're gonna be footing the bill for every other school district in Vermont who did hit the 5%, because they can only go up 5% next year. Every school who doesn't go up 5% this year is at risk of having to go 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever to make up the difference between the spending and the taxes of those schools who did hit the 5%. And there are much bigger schools than us out there who are, we know, starting well above the 5%, because they're the ones that have to cut to get to the 5%. We're increasing to get to 5%. And those are the big guys that are up there. So the concern is that big shortfall in the ed fund in future years. And we don't want to be the ones left holding the bag to pay that tab.
So I keep hearing you throw out the 5% cap. Why 5%? I mean, is it because you're going for the max, or could you have chosen less than 5%?
The 5% cap is in legislation. It's part of Act 127. So that's
It's not a number
we didn't pick it. No, it's there for us to hit or not hit.
It's hard to get that, inhale all this stuff. One of the things that I clearly remember mentioning last year that, I'm going to talk about again this year is the accessory program. Last year, we were told that it was probably going to be the last year funded for it to get depleted for it and whatnot. It was obviously needed. It was used. There was a need for that money. If something happens negatively with this budget, what's going to happen with those programs, or where's that money going to come from to continue those programs as we know they are needed?
Mm-hmm. They are definitely needed. And we're not in a position now to say, if the budget gets cut by this much, we're not can't name programs we're going to cut. I think that's premature at this point. But they're going to be hard decisions to make. And I think if we do reach that point, the admin team would have to go back and strategize on how we meet what's, extra, but where the top priorities are.
What's the priority? I know, it's all in terms of people working in the school with kids and support that they have. We do a lot with a little, and we have added a few things. This budget is hoping to add in social studies teacher. We sort of cut back a little bit to do something else. We'd like to have that back. We're hoping to reduce some of the study halls and have a few more social studies offerings. Those are things that we think are responsible program adds. The capital is where we have a multi-year plan. And if we are successful in talking to voters and getting them to say, yes, we understand the strategy, those are the things that we would start with. Sorry, I'm sort of mixing my, there'd be a project we put off, right? And we look at reprioritizing those, but they're all important. The parking lots, the roof and high gate is, these are things that are not like, oh, wouldn't it be swell if, right? These are important things that we need to keep our aging buildings in good shape. So we think that this is an opportunity to do that responsibly for this community. Yeah.
Did that sort of?
Yeah. It's a tough position to be in. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I get it. I mean, the building is important. If we don't have this building, we're not going to be able to teach. If we don't have the teachers, it's a huge snowball effect that it's all needed on one to make it work.
I mean, it's a tough position, but I actually think that as a district, we're in a really good position because the way it's worked in our favors. I think our staff is doing an excellent job of just prioritizing what we need and making sure that our students are going to have, the best possible outcomes. Our facilities are going to be in shape, and we're going to have staff that we can keep competitive and keep here. And so, while I don't agree with everything that was done in terms of why they did it with legislator. The way it is formatted, it does benefit us this year. And I think that's an important message that, we need to keep saying based on this 5% and Act 127. So, I think we're in a good position and hopefully there's enough people in the community who are going to support that.
Well, that means you have two groups of people that you need to educate. You need to educate the kids here, but you also need to educate your taxpayers. Because I'm going to be the first to tell you, I mean, I know you guys have been talking about this a lot, but it's a lot to intake as far as information goes and to know how it works. And I'm a little concerned about what it's going to be like next year, the year after. That 5% cap that you talk about, not so sure it's going to stay at 5% or what's going to become of it. You know, where's the security for us if we open up this new gig here? You know, what's going to happen for us?
Yeah, it's a valid point. The legislature could walk into session this year and say, it's not 5% cap anymore, it's 10%, right?
Yeah.
And that's,
They may have.
and they may have to, right? Which is, again, precisely why we've chosen capital projects to fill that bucket now, because we're also afraid of that. We really don't know what they're gonna do. We don't know how big the shortfall in the ed fund is gonna be. We don't know what mechanisms they'll use to try to fill it. So we're trying to maximize our opportunities under the law as it stands now and maximize our flexibility to react to changes to the law in the future. You know, I mean, that's honestly the whole game here for us. That's the whole strategy. And then this is the way to execute it is with those capital dollars there. But you're right. There's a pile of uncertainty here.
We're trying to play the game that the legislature put in front of us, and to not do it puts us in a vulnerable situation. The other thing we have to consider is, like Devin said, we've got all these projects lined up, and we're not going to be able to do, even with this budget, we have to prioritize, right? We can't catch everything up in 1 year, right? But it gives us an opportunity to get a good start. And the issue is, like Devin had stated, if the budget doesn't pass, well, there's two things. The budget doesn't pass, and we have to cut some of these projects, it's probably not going to affect the tax rate unless we get below that 5%, which makes us vulnerable to next year's taxes. Because like Devin said, it's a long-term project. We're trying to get, protect ourselves, not just this year, but in future years. But the thing is, if the budget fails, we've got projects, it's one-time money, right, Yvonne? We're budgeting for this year, we got to spend it this year, right? We've got these projects lined up. Well, you know how it is. You want a project, you've got to get a contract, you've got to get lined up. We're pushing it at town meeting day as it is. So if the budget fails, there's probably going to be some things we're going to have to cut, even though we don't want to, because we're not going to be able to get them done. So like you said earlier, it's a education to the taxpayers, and it's not easy. I've been wrestling with it myself for a couple of months now, and still trying to figure out where all this money that we don't have to pay is going to come from. It's going to have to be paid at some point, and that's what we're talking about. Protect ourselves for next year when they change things. Like you said, if we redo the driveway out here, we don't have to do that next year. So that's money that we wouldn't have to budget again if, you know, if it turns out that something changes. So.
Matt has your hand up.
I think one thing that we don't talk about, because there's no sense of going back and revisiting history. But I would say, having been around a while in this district, we didn't always get good information from the people who were maintaining our buildings. And as I thought about it, I think what we had for years were cleaning people. People who understood how to keep your building clean, but didn't have the knowledge to understand sometimes. If you didn't repair this properly, you're going to repair it again and again and again. And I think with our new head of maintenance, director of maintenance that works in multiple schools, starting to see a pattern. Roof jobs are a good example. I remember here at LVU here in Lowell, if we could throw $50,000 or $100,000 on this, we could take care of that. When we should have been saying, maybe we should have spent $500,000 5 years ago. Now it's millions of dollars. And with the business office being able to put together information that's consistent from building to building as far as expenses, it's made a big difference, but it's been brought to our attention. And I'll give you an example. Peter knows more about than I do. But I think we found out there was one wall, also gymnasium in Franklin, that had no insulation. Remember that? The new guy there started looking at it, and we took care of it. I think we took care of that within our budget. But that's the type of things we're finding out as we get somebody who knows buildings and structures and efficiency. And you know, I don't think probably any parent or student in Franklin complained for all those years. But when we really got into it, we said, you know, it's not a big buck item, but it's going to come back on cost, and it's also going to protect the structure. And we could talk all night here about the things we've discovered, I think, that probably didn't get full attention over the last 20 years. And now we're paying for it.
And I think the people in the district should feel confident that we have very good, like Don said, facility directors, both in these schools, and Franklin has its own director. But yeah, I'm very confident in the direction we're going with the building maintenance.
Thank you. Pierrette, you had your hand up?
Yes, Devin said something about a 3% change and to our benefit, and was that in the yield, or where was that 3% change over the past week that you said that you found?
Yeah, it was a decrease of the yield by 3%, which increases everybody's baseline tax rate by 3%. By everybody, I mean the whole state of Vermont.
Well, that's lovely.
Yeah, and last minute like this. So these are the risks we're dealing with at the moment.
And Brooks, I see your chat about social studies. It's not all study halls, it's some study halls by offering more social studies courses and other courses, not just social studies. Please don't dust anything.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Very good. All right, I'll bring up. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming for the input survey. Appreciate Julie, Laura, thank you, Devin, thank you for walking everybody through that, and the committee chairs. I guess we'll just end the input session, and we will see everyone at the next board meeting.
Next Tuesday in Swanton Central School Library.
Next Tuesday at SWAT. Thank you very much, everyone.